Hello and welcome back to Bricking It, and today we're looking at our Great Hall module. As its name would suggest, the Great Hall is pretty big. In fact, it's the largest module I've got in my Hogwarts. It uses two 8x16 base plates for its length, although the Great Hall itself only takes up 1.5 of those. And we have on the end here a little entrance hall, as you can see with our proclamations up there, just to fill up the rest of the space. So my Great Hall is different from, well, the standard one that you would see in the official Lego release, and I imagine many other people's Great Halls, in that instead of having the tables lengthways across the mock and a little suggestion of the teacher's table, I've done it the other way around. And we focus down the length of the hall, so we just get a very cut off piece of the student tables, and we get to see all of our teachers across their table. So as much as I enjoy building my Hogwarts, it really is a minifig display. It gives me a chance to pose my minifigs in particular scenes from the movies, and I really wanted it to be densely packed with figures, and the easiest way to be able to represent all 4 houses and still be able to see a full teacher's table was to go end on. So that's what I did. So before I gas on for too long, let's just break this down and we'll show you how it's made up. In fact, let's use a little bit of video magic. Reducto! There we go. I apologise, that was very lame. Anyway, let's have a look at how our Great Hall is constructed. So it's fairly simple. As with most Lego buildings, it starts with a box. So one thing you don't really get to see from the front is this large row of windows along the back there, just because we have our lintel in front and they're quite high up on the walls. I was going to extend it down, have a bit more window space, maybe have a second row of windows, but that really interfered with the tops of the chairs, which would not necessarily be a bad thing. But I think if I ever do come back and make any adjustments, I might change the window style to stained glass instead of these simple lattices. Possibly, I don't know, and then maybe I'll take the opportunity to extend it down a bit further. There's no reason the chair back should not pass in front of the window. So speaking of the chair backs, as you can see, there aren't any chairs actually in this location. The teacher's platform is just 3 studs deep. The first one of those is taken up with the table itself. That gives us 2 studs for placing our teachers, which would need or leave no room for chairs. So we simulate our chairs just using these shield pieces here, and they get studded onto the wall like this. So this leaves us just enough room to attach some teachers onto our dais. There we go. And even like this with a skirt, they fit nicely on there. Right. So the only conflict we have with teachers in there, because I do like to swap out the teachers occasionally and put different teachers in at the Great Hall, is with teachers like McGonagall and Professor Vectra, who have these really nice hats, but they are so wide that the back of the rim of the hat will conflict with the chair back. So to solve that, we just turn it out the other way, and Professor can just slide in there, and then let's see if I can get focus on that. So if you can see, the chair and the back no longer come into conflict, but they are sharing that same width. The head goes all the way back, so it's almost touching touching the wall of the Great Hall in there. So that solves that problem, but we still get a little suggestion of chair back in there. And when we are placing them, because of the point is so low down, the bottom of the skirt just about clears that gap in there between the studs. So it does mean sliding our teachers in along the side. So this generally takes a long time and it's quite complicated, and time consuming, and it would be much easier for me to tear down the whole mock and just stud them in normally, but I don't. So let's put our teachers back in behind the table. So this teacher here in the red dress is an entirely unsatisfactory and really only part way thought through mock for one of the unnamed or uncredited professors in the story. And I think this is Professor Vector, I think. Arithmancy or Ancient Runes. Someone who's got their Potter head on today will be able to tell me in the comments which one I mean. We have Madam Hooch, who doesn't have a permanent home in one of the other setups. We have a Dumbledore, for I have many. Professor Sprout, because again her greenhouse mock is very small and there's just room for one greenhouse student, so she can be enjoying a cup. And another teacher I have many of is Professor Snape. And then the table, simple construction of these gold detail elements, the scroll elements, and a couple of rows of plate on top. And that will just pop in front. There, like that. And that's the top table. So you can see all the teachers are raising the glass, as well as looking quite festive and cheery. This is mainly because we are on such a tight space allocation that they can't both have, or they can't all have both arms down at their sides. One arm needs to be up, so they might as well be doing something with it. Next to the teachers, we have our house points counter, and this is just a slight adaptation from what came in the Hogwarts Magical Trunk set. It's very barely adjusted to give us a house point counter. You can see Gryffindor streaming ahead. Poor old Hufflepuff, not been doing so well this term. It just sits in here underneath one of our floating candles. Not really floating, and unfortunately I don't have the headroom to do much about that. If I was to put floating candles all over the place, there would just be trans-clear bars just clashing with everything, and that's all you'd see really. And once we've got the lintel in at the front of the build, you can't really see them anyway, so we'll leave that one to the imagination. Okay, let's move on to the rest of the space. So before we move into the main hall, let's have a look at our entrance hall. Now, sitting next to this, just here in the mock, is the grand staircase. I'm going to be looking at in a future video. But that really gives us the main space, this sort of like the outdoor or outside the hall kind of space. So this is just a very small area. See, I've got a big fireplace in there. Not really representative of the actual space, but it just gives you a bit more visual interest. You see we've got a couple of snot studs on the wall just so we can put up our proclamations, which are just mounted on a 2x6 so they can all go up in one go. And these will just stud up onto the wall here like that. Now, although they're really only a feature of Harry and the Gang's 5th year, I do like to have them up all the time again just for that bit of interest. And then this is usually where Mrs. Norris and Filch live most of the time. There we go. Lurking around looking for students. Again, they will reposition within the mock based on requirements, but it's just a nice place to keep them. Nice and appropriate. So as you can see, Mrs. Norris from the latest Dumbledore's office set. Really like that piece. Lovely, I love the eyes. Looks proper like she's just giving people a what are you playing at stare. I've used the old Argus Filch from a previous set. Didn't have the, I have got the one with the brown robes, but he's actually been reshuffled with some other pieces, and he's playing the part of a wizarding customer in my new Diagon Alley. First part of which has just been posted up on the site, so you can go and see how to build your own Diagon Alley in a Hogwarts moment. So that's mainly it for the basic infrastructure of the build. Now, as I say, the front space, as you saw at the beginning across here, usually filled with students and tables, but we can represent a good few other scenes within our Great Hall just by changing out some of the furniture. So let's do that. So the first and most obvious thing we can do is add a dais. So much like myself, this is very simple. Just a few jumpers, a couple of plates on top of one plate layer, and it can sit here in the middle at the front. And Dumbledore can pop out and give his addresses behind his nice owl-shaped lectern. Now, I've seen many builds for these, much more elaborate than this, but really, if I was to put the candlesticks on and make the base more decorative, it would just dominate the space. And this isn't about the lectern. I'll leave that to the builders with much more space in their Great Hall. We just need it in there, just to give that impression, so Dumbledore can make his proclamations. So that's the simplest little addition, but then this dais can be used for other things too, such as a Tri-Wizard tournament. So we can set a scene for the arrival of the schools, and here you'll see Master Karkaroff, Victor Crumb and a couple of Durmstrangs, and of course Madame Maxine, Fleur and a couple more Beaubatons. So this is a nice one that we can display. I also have that I'm making to go in this front space a large 16 by 16 base plate that gets suspended out into the middle of the mock, and using this we can extend the hall scene if you want to do anything that's a bit more expansive and uses more space in the hall. So things like the entry of the schools, so we can have our Durmstrang fire breathers and Beaubatons dancing up the central aisle. And it just allows us to put out a few longer tables and just make it a bit more of an interesting scene. We don't have it up most of the time, but for things like if I want to set the scene of the entry of the schools, or what else? If I'm doing Halloween or even Christmas or the Yule Ball, where we want a slightly different format for the Great Hall, we can use that extension. I'll show that in a separate video because it's not quite ready yet, and the way we're going to hold it in place inside the mock is not fully established, but there we go. Let's move on. This next scene we were showing is the drawing of the names from the Goblet of Fire itself. Now, I do have the new advent calendar. I've been very restrained. I'm waiting to December to open it day by day, so I don't yet have the new version of the Goblet of Fire that I could put in the scene, or that really nice new tile with a scrap of paper with Harry's name on it. I'm looking forward to adding those into the scene. Whenever I have Madame Maxine at the table, I do like to put Professor Flitwick next to her, because just like in the movie, it really demonstrates the difference in their heights and shows how big she is. And we have Hagrid at the side looking on dumbstruck. I can actually extend, in this situation, the teacher's table and dais up the side using this row of studs here, just along here, so we've got somewhere for Hagrid to sit. And as the table is a U shape, we can put an extra extension on this side, but we don't really need it. I have no other professors that I want to add to the scene. But this is our Goblet of Fire. And we've got one more scene from this year that we can also do. So as we can see, for year 4, there's lots of different flavour we can add to our Great Hall, but probably the most famous scene and the best one for interest, and especially when I add the extension on the front, because you can't really show much of it on our main thing, is the Yule Ball. And for the Yule Ball, we have a number of accessories which came from an advent calendar a couple of years ago. So we've got some trees that we can scatter about the place, as as well as our tables for our guests. We can just set our scene a little bit using these bits and pieces scattered throughout the hall, adding in our tables. And when we've got the big clear area to set up our dancers, we can add the champions and their guests. So these display in one of my preferred storage methods, which is inside the Hogwarts Moments cover. Just added some of the stickers from the Transfiguration class there, just to make it look a bit more interesting, to give it a bit more visual impact if we use this as a display stand. So that blank space on the bottom row is for Madame Maxine to slot into. So she'll just live in there, just one moment. Just about creeps in under that lintel. So we see each of the champions with their escorts. We've got Fleur and, oh, I'm going to get this wrong, Roger Davies, pretty sure. Victor and Hermione with Dumbledore in his party outfit. Ron, oh no, Padma and Parvati. I always get them mixed up, and it's even harder in Lego when they both look even more identical. Ron, and then Cho and Cedric Diggory. So as I say, we need the larger space really for this display, and we can add them back into our Great Hall mock. Let's choose another year. So here we have our Toad Choir from the Prisoner of Azkaban. It's one of two scenes that are distinct to year 3 that we can set up in our Great Hall, the second of which I haven't got sorted out yet, because it's a bit of a tricky one. That's of course where everyone is brought down to the Great Hall to camp out with the whole school together, and that involves getting together a lot of purple sleeping bags and working out how to make it look like there are minifigs within them without them being taller than dining tables. But I'll work it out eventually. Empty sleeping bags are easy, and maybe I'll just do a floor covered in empty sleeping bags and all the students standing around chatting or being given instructions by the teachers. But that's one scene I want to get ready for the Great Hall for this year, and the other of course is the start of term, where we have our frog chorus. This is nice and easy. Bunch of students on the dais that usually sit on our benches. A few green frogs. We've got some brown ones as well for visual interest, but problem is they just look like sweets, so we don't use the brown frog anymore. And this is our frog chorus. We might see the sleeping bag scene in another update, but let's move on. So we step backwards in time once more. We're in a Chamber of Secrets scene, and it's obviously the Dueling Club. So we see Malfoy and Harry going at it with their wands. Just the space all around filled up with students, with Snape and Lockhart looking on. Now I'm really trying to assemble a proper dueling outfit mock for Professor Lockhart, and I've identified the torso I need, and it's just unavailable in the UK on Bricklink, but I will track it down. It will be mine. One day we'll have a lovely Lockhart in dueling outfit to add into this scene. As we can see, just got the dueling platform here. It's just got a couple of studs on the end, a little step at each end. It would be nice to maybe work that crescent moon design into the surface, but it's quite a small area because it's got to fit in this discrete space. But there's our Dueling Club. Now sometimes we also use this one displayed in the grand staircase, so you'll probably see this mock again when we cover that module, just because I like to leave the Great Hall set up as the Great Hall, and that one's a little bit easier to change out, but it's all in that sort of downstairs front of house type area. So that is our Dueling Club. Let's move on. So some of our displays are based on the time of year rather than which school year it is. One I like to put up in September is the sorting ceremony to celebrate back to Hogwarts Day. Here you can see Ron, Harry and Malfoy waiting while Hermione gets sorted. Now I'm thinking that what I might do is create some kind of little brick built mechanism that can just sit behind Hermione and support the floating hat just above her head, just so it looks a bit more interesting. Maybe I have to replace these couple of studs so she can stand a bit lower, so that Professor McGonagall can hold it above her head. That's just one of these little improvements that I can add in. I think this Hogwarts is now mostly built, it's just making these little changes and additional interest pieces. So there's our sorting ceremony. Obviously, as we get around to October and pumpkin spice season, we can scatter some pumpkins throughout the hall for a Halloween theme. And at Christmas time, we'll either set up the Yule Ball or maybe just put a couple of large Christmas trees in the corner. But we will see those in some future videos as well, if I ever get around to it. All right, let's reset our Great Hall to dinner. So just before we finish up with our Great Hall, I just wanted to show you one more part that's a piece of the Great Hall infrastructure. So I showed you our storage book that we had your ball participants in. That lives up on my Hogwarts Moments bookshelf. There's also another one, which is part of my infrastructure builds. This is just where our dueling platform lives. It just slots into a little pocket just here on the side. Okay. Then we have our magical trunk, which is currently being used as minifigure storage. So in here we have, just at the back here, Ron, Hermione, Harry and Malfoy in their unsorted Hogwarts robes for the sorting ceremony. Professor McGonagall obviously generally lives in Transfiguration, so she's not stored in here. We have our bow batons, behind them you see our Durmstrangs. In the middle you might recognise these hairstyles here. We have Molly and Arthur and Bill, who come to visit Harry during the Triwizard Tournament. Also there for the Battle of Hogwarts, so it's handy to have them in the box. And just filling up the last space is another mock that I'm still working on, which is going to be Mundungus Fletcher. Just need to find a slightly better face for him before I'm ready to call that one complete. So that's where we store all our parts, and they're not being used in the mock. So here we are, back in our Great Hall, reset to its standard. As you can see, floating above the Slytherin table, the Bloody Baron's just making his presence felt. Just come for a lurk around. And he's just up on these two spare studs that we have sticking out of the wall. I can also use those to mount one of these nice flying brackets. That does leave our ghost just floating out in space, not really in the scene, but merely near the scene. I like to have ghosts occasionally floating about in the open space in the middle of the mock. It just does make it look a bit more a bit fuller and a bit more interesting. Of course, in year 3 we'll have Dementors hovering around above the roofs, but again, that's something we can look at a later date. Let's put the lid on the front of our Great Hall. Once more, make it complete. And the students hungrily wait for their dinner to be arrived. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave us a like. I'm fairly aware I've made plenty of mistakes during the commentary on this video, so if you'd like to correct me, please feel free to do so in the comments. And if you'd like to see more Hogwarts mocks, then please subscribe to Bricking It.